Hello, Lizzie here, and today we're going to be making Maud. Maud is a coffee cup carrier or a teacup carrier, the ones that you get, you know, when you're out and about in the car. I've got some Christmas ones in there, but it's the average size, so it's the large size, and I'll measure it all for you so you can see. We've got a popper here, so these side pieces can come down, and that's where the cups are held. You've got pockets here where you can put your stirrers just in there, and your sugar sachets as well can go in there, so you're all good to go. And then these just pop up to the top, fold this over, and the handles hold everything in place. Now, one of the little quirky features of Maud is that she has a little pull-out tray here at the bottom. Now, this is optional. We'll talk about this as we go along. And the little pop-out tray is actually the same fabric, but it's had vinyl applied to it. So if there are any little spillages inside the little box part where you're carrying your cups, then the little vinyl bit can be just wiped clean. So this is Maud. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about how we do the straps. So now we're going to actually make the strap. Now, all the instructions, all the dimensions, everything that you need is on my website lizzycurtis.com, and this is called Maud. So here are the straps. So in actual fact, I've joined both straps together. Again, all the dimensions are on the pattern, and what I've done is I've folded it in half to get the middle section. So I've got a crease line. If I show it that way, you'll be able to see that there's a central crease going down there. And you can see also that I folded over, so when I fold again and I get a 1-inch strap, it's really, really neat. But obviously we need to top stitch that. So when we look inside, it's really important that you see this, that the seams have been joined together, and then I've put the stabilizer on. So you can hardly see that there's the stabilizer, but there's the seam over the top. And the two seams actually are placed on the outside of the bag beautifully. And if you know my laptop bag pattern, then you'll know what this is all about. So start anywhere. I tend to start where the seam is joined together, and all you're going to do is top stitch. So I'm just now going to do the other side. So flip it over and do the other side. Now, I don't back stitch when I do my top stitch. Where I've started, when I get to that point, I just stitch over 2 or 3 stitches, and that's enough to secure. So that's my top stitching done. So make this lovely and neat, trim the threads. What we can do now is actually stitch this to the outside of the bag. And it's really easy to do. So get your main piece of fabric, your outer fabric. Place it down on your desk. Now, you will have marked your positions of your straps on your fabric. Use a heat erasable pen. Everything is on the pattern, so you don't need to worry about where and how wide, where should I place them. Everything is done for you. So this is where we bring in our pins. Well, unfortunately, we can't use quilting clips. And all you're going to do is find the center of your base. Again, that's on the pattern, so nothing is left to chance. So all we need to do is line those up. And I draw the line that is going to be central across my strap. So I'm going to place my 2 seam pieces first, and I'll show you when I've done that so you see what I'm talking about. So just place that over the top and just pop a pin in there. So you can see that that's where I've marked the center of the bottom of my bag, and that's where the seam is placed, right over that central part. Like I say, all the measurements are in the pattern. And then you've measured down from the top of the bag, and again I'm just going to pop a pin in there so I know where to stop stitching. The same on the other side. Like I say, if you've made my laptop bag, you're very familiar with this part of the pattern. It's very similar. So again, I've marked where I need to stop stitching again. So although we've top stitched the strap, we're actually going to stitch again over where we've top stitched. Now you could do a second line, so it's sort of more into the strap if you want to, but I tend to just go over where I stitched, so it makes it like a double row of stitching. So there's my pieces, my straps actually pinned in place. You can see what that looks like. So I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to top stitch all the way around, and I'm just going to go over what I've just stitched, and that all attaches it all then to my bag. Remove your pins. And I would do a little back stitch there, just 1 or 2 stitches, and then all we're going to do is go straight up where we stitched before. So just look a little bit more sort of, the thread will look a little bit more dense, I suppose, but like I say, you could come inside that stitch line if you wanted to, or you go right on the edge. So my top stitching is about 1/8 of an inch from the size of my strap. So when I get to where my pin is, I'm just going to pivot. Now if you want to, you could go and do a double row stitching here, but you're only going to be carrying tea or coffee, so it's not going to be desperately heavy. So I'm just going to do 1 row. Come back to where you first started. And then just stitch across, and again just do a couple of stitches back stitch. That end just wants to be a little bit more secure, and then repeat on the other side. And once we've done this, this is the outer bag actually finished, apart from attaching it to the lining. So it's a nice easy make. If you've got the needle down facility, it's a good time to use it. Just coming up to where we started. Like I say, a couple of little back stitches. There we go. So just trim those threads so they're nice and neat. It's always good to trim as you go. Just flip it over, you can see the back there, how that looks. And also you might see that my wadding is 1/4 inch smaller than my outer fabric, and that's deliberate. You can see that there, which means that it's not as bulky on the seams when you come to stitch all the pieces together. So there we are, that's our straps now in place, so we can pop that to one side. Don't need that for a little while. So the next stage is actually stitching the box part. So if we bring in Maud, you can see that the box part is this part. So we're going to now stitch those together. Now I have put the wadding on the outside, on the inside of the box. It's entirely up to you. You could use thermal wadding if you wanted to. If these are going to be carried for a little way, you might want to use thermal wadding. But if you're just going to go from the garage to the car, I wouldn't worry too much about that. But it's nice to have the wadding. Now when you're stitching these pieces, I want you to see that there is at least 1/2 inch cut away from the outside edge. The seam allowance for the box is 1/2 inch. Everywhere else, pretty much, unless I say so, is 1/4 inch. So you can see that I've cut my wadding down. I don't want the size of this box to be bulky in any way. So I'm just going to do one so you can see. Oops. So you're stitching the long side to the short side, right sides together, and it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. The other thing to remember, and this is all in the pattern, is to stop 1 inch from the base. So if I do this and then show you, now you can measure if you want to, and get a pen and a ruler and just measure that inch. So you can do that as you go, or you can mark that prior to stitching. Let me just show you what I've done. It's really important that this stage is followed carefully. We'll see why as we go along. So there is my stitching. There's the top. I've come down to here and I've stopped there, and that is 1 inch from the bottom. So when you turn it through, you can see that you've got a split there. Okay, when we've stitched all of these sides together to make a box, that's going to be ironed open, and that's important that we do that, and you'll see as we go along the reason why. So if I just finger press that, there we go, that's it. You'll see that that's what it's going to look like. Okay, and it's nice and neat. So show you from the front. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and actually now stitch all those sides together. So I've done my inside of the box, so now I'm going to do the outer, and this just has stabilizer on it. There's no wadding on this, so we're going to repeat exactly the same process. 1/2 inch seam allowance, start at the top and stop 1 inch from the base. So that's my inner base and my outer base or box completed. I just need to trim all my threads and iron the seams open. If I just do one, and then you'll be able to see what I mean. So I'll bring my ironing mat in. So just position it so you haven't got a seam getting in the way. I'll trim those threads in just a minute. So just open up those seams and give it a nice iron. There we go. So it all looks like that. I'm just going to trim my threads now, and I'm actually going to iron all the rest. So while I'm doing that, have a look at this. You can find access to my Gold Club from my website. Sign up and you can connect to my Facebook Live events and join in all the fun my Gold Club members have on a weekly basis. And of course you get free patterns. See my Gold Club video on YouTube for more information. So I have ironed all the seams open flat so you can see what they look like, but I also want you to notice that one short end I've actually pressed that seam up, so where we left the split, I've just pressed that up, so that's what it looks like, and that allows you to put the slider in the base of the box itself. Now if you don't want that slider, that's optional, you can leave this part out, and you'll see when I stitch the box together how it all fits into the actual makings, but we'll do it as the pattern. So now we're going to put right sides together and just make sure that the two pieces where I've sort of ironed up here, they are sitting together, because we're going to top stitch those pieces together. So what we need to do now is actually join the two pieces, so just get your seam allowances to meet up in all four corners. And you're still with your ½ inch seam allowance, but you could, if you wanted to at this point, you could do a ½ inch, you could make it a little bit. You don't worry about this part. This is not crucial that it's ½ inch. It's those seams that is the crucial part. So this is where you can see if you've cut all your pieces correctly to the right size. That looks great. So just to make things easier, bringing my machine in, but I'm going to take my table off. There we go. Doesn't matter where you start. And you're just going to run around the top of this box part. And just make sure those seams stay open. Now I've used a medium weight stabilizer, and I say in the pattern what I actually use, and I use an 80-20 wadding or batting, and nothing too high loft, so nothing too spongy. An 80-20 is a good weight for this type of project, but if you wanted to, you could make it with a thermal wadding like I said before. And it doesn't matter how you put a thermal wadding in, really. So that's my top put together. Make sure I've got the clips out. So now what you want to do is make sure you've got your right sides facing out, because we're just going to press that top part so it's nice and flat. So and then we're going to top stitch that so it's nice and boxy. Let's pop that over there. We'll bring in the iron and the magic mat. There we go. So just give that a press. Now I wouldn't worry too much if the seams are not open on this top edge, because they're all going to lay flat when you top stitch. You could give this a little bit of a steam. There we go, that will do nicely. So now it's a case of top stitching all round the edge. So we're going to put the outside let's get this the right way around. So the outside goes on the outside, so the main fabric is facing out. We might as well see the pretty fabric, huh? And just wriggle that so it's sitting nice and flat. It'll look beautiful with a top stitch. We're also going to top stitch those two folded seams together. So if you have a look here, those are our seams that are folded under, our edges that are folded under. So I'm actually going to top stitch those together so they are joined, but I'm also going to top stitch around the edge here to make it look really neat. So I'll leave my table of my machine off for the moment. So again, you might want to press this open, press this flat. And of course you could make this in really dark fabrics, so suitable for a man, but actually you could make it in really sweet sort of baby fabric, and instead of cups of coffee, maybe it's bottles for the baby. Be a nice little carrier, won't it, for a young mum? Because of course there's little pockets so you can put some bickies in there. Right, so there's the top stitching around the top of the bag. Just get those threads snipped. So now we're just going to top stitch those two folded pieces together, and that gives us a nice neat finish. And just be careful you don't catch. So if I show you here, so we're going to top stitch along this part here, from here to here. But what I want you to be careful of is that you don't catch these pieces here, and that's why I've kept that little bit of a split just exactly as it is. Really does make a difference. But just line them up, pop them under your machine, about 1/8 of an inch top stitch, little back stitch just to hold that. I've got my stitch length on 3. It's always a good length actually for top stitching, number 3. 2.5 for regular stitching. Got a regular needle in my machine as well, nothing special. I was just thinking maybe you could make this from faux leather, something like that. So again, just neaten off your threads. Okay. So we're actually not far off finishing this. I know it sounds amazing, doesn't it? I don't think that's the case at all. So we're just bringing in the base. So again, the base is one long piece of fabric, and again I've got marks on here where you need to place your box. All that instruction is on the pattern, so don't fret when I start placing this on here and you don't know what I'm doing. Have a look at the pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my slider on what's looking at me is the top edge, the bottom edge to you. So look, if you can see there, that's where my slider will go. And then I'm just going to offer it up. Yeah, that's fine. What I've got here is a couple of lines. Now, you've got the raw edge. Now, you might find this a little bit tricky because you've got wadding and stabilised fabric, but you've got a raw edge on your long side, okay? And I want you to place that on the lines that you'll have drawn. So I'm going to get my pins in. And you're going to pin this in place. So if we do it roughly, and then we can always move it. So I get the middle piece done first, and then I'll show you what I've done. And again, don't forget this is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And just make sure that your raw edges are parallel to the line that you will have drawn. If you haven't drawn this on here, maybe you've got some chalk that you could use. That would help you no end. Even, do you know what? Even a regular pen would be okay because we're going to stitch over the top of it. Right. So you'll see. Let me squidge all this down so you can see what I've done. So across my fabric, and it's difficult for you to see, there is a line, and my raw edge is going across the line, right across the bag base. And I've also left, there's a good 1/4 inch each side, and make sure that's equal, because you're going to stitch the base to your outer piece of fabric, so you do want that to be free from being stitched, and just make sure, like I say, they're equal. It's not bad. You've also got a pocket, and the pocket is just a double piece of fabric. So you cut the piece on the fold. Let me undo that. There we go. You've cut the piece on the fold, and you've put the wrong sides together, so you've got a nice folded edge across the top. Now what you need to do now is to stitch this at the same time as you're stitching that long edge. So what I'm going to do is place it onto my box, or my box seam, my box edge, and this is where I'm going to put another row of pins. So I'm going to pin it, and then I'm going to show you. So let's put another pin in there. So don't forget, it's still 1/2 inch seam allowance at this point. So I'm just turning that around. Here's my pocket, and I've placed it on top of my, kind of like the box part. So I've got all my raw edges going across the top here. So what that's doing is, not only are you going to stitch your long edge down and secure it onto your bag, but it's also neatening everything off at the same time. So look, now I want to show you what that looks like. So look, there's my pocket, and now that will go edge to edge, so you can see that it goes from this side all the way across to that seam there, and that's absolutely how it should be, because once we've stitched it, we're going to stay stitch it onto the base. So I'll stitch this across, and then we'll do the stay stitching so you can see. So you're making a layer up. So there's the edge of your bag, and that 1/2 inch seam allowance has gone raw edges out, and then we've popped the pocket on top. So I'm just going to stitch that. So I'll bring my table back in. Little back stitch to hold. Just make sure you don't stitch over those pins. Got a few extra there. So make sure everything stays in place. So if it's wriggled, just get it all lined up again. So you're going from side to side, right across, from raw edge to raw edge. So let me just show you this. So there we are. I've gone right across. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that pocket down, and I'm just going to stay stitch it to my box base there. So just along here, 1/8 inch, and that will keep that pocket in place. And you can see that lovely folded edge there makes the top of that pocket really beautiful. So let's just stay stitch that. So about 1/8 inch. And if you want to press this and keep it all lovely neat and steam it so it's all beautifully flat, then please do that. It does make a huge difference to iron and steam as you go. Just trim all your threads. They have a habit of sneaking out of the seams when you least expect it. And the other side. So you've stitched one long edge now of the box, and you can see how that looks. It's going to sit beautifully on there, and there's the pocket there. So that's all done. So one side you've got the part where the slider is, so you can ignore that bit. You don't need to stitch that, but we need to do the same as what we just did for this long side. So again, you're going to get all your raw edges, There we go. And you'll have marked the line, and I will explain this in the pattern where the line will go. Again, you're going to do exactly the same. It's raw edges out. It's like you're splaying that seam out. Get all your fabric out of the way. Because of the wadding and the stabilizer, it really wants to do what it wants to do, not what you want to do. Just make sure you've caught all those seams. There we go. And make sure that you know where we folded the seams out, you know, when we press them out so they're nice and flat, just make sure they're all sitting nicely together. So that's that part pinned. So now all we need to do is put the other pocket on just like we did before. So just get all of this base out of the way, this box. So the folded edge is your good side, if you like, the top of your pocket. So you're going raw edges together, and you're going across the whole width of your base here. And again, you just want to pin that. There we go. And 2 or 3 pins is enough to hold this in place. And like I say, it goes right across. Just make sure it does. And I'll just pop one in the middle. That's it. That's great. So if you think we've got the outside of the box raw edges facing out, the pocket raw edges facing out, we're going to do that 1/2 inch seam allowance again to catch all those layers. From side to side, so from the raw edge of the base right across, and just make sure you don't, like I said before, stitch these pins. So let's just move that a little bit. There we are, that's a bit better. Okay, so just make sure you remove all your pins as you go. Try and keep on that line that you've drawn on your fabric. Make sure all of your raw edges are coming right up to that line. And go straight across. You could tack this if you wanted to, so that's just like a hand basting just to hold all the layers together. You could even glue it if you wanted it to really stay still while you're stitching. It's important that it lies flat and it's exactly where you want it to be, otherwise your pockets will be wonky. So again, look, I've stitched down that seam there, that's my 1/2 inch. So all I'm going to do is bring my pocket over and stay stitch that across this part here, both sides. So I'm just pulling that up tight. And I'll just go beyond the end of the seam. I'll just trim those threads. Now when we do this side, so when we go back to, so when let me just show you, it's easier. When I come to stitch the pocket on here, and I'm going to stay stitch, I'm actually going to bring out the seam of the side of the base, and I'm going to stitch that as well, and I'm going to stay stitch that so that's all incorporated into that side edge. You'll be able to see once I've done it what I mean. So it's all the raw edges out, so your short side pieces are now going to come raw edges out. I'm just trimming my threads, there seems to be an awful lot. So let me show you again just to make sure you know what I'm talking about. So here is the raw edge on the other short end, so that's not the end where the slider is, we're ignoring that. So on this part here, I'm going to just flay that out, if you like. I'm going to just flatten it out like that, and I'm going to stay stitch that to the side of my base, and that'll hold that all in place. And then I'm going to continue up here to stay stitch that pocket that we just made in place as well. So I'm just going to continue. I'm going to start here and I'm going to stitch all the way along to here, but it's just a stay stitch. So there'll be a little gap where the pocket finishes and the side seams start, or the side edges of the box. So just bring that out and then flatten your pocket. Just make sure that's lovely and flat. Like I say, always press it if you're not sure. Just continue on. It's only a stay stitch, just holding all those pieces together nice and neatly as you stitch. Right, so let's just see what's happened. So what we've created now is the box, so that's all done. And we've got the pockets on there as well. Could do with a press, but we'll just carry on till we're finished. And on this side we've got the part for the slider, so that's all done, so that's beautiful. So the next part is to actually stitch the two pieces together. So if we flatten this out, now I've put poppers on mine. You could use put magnetic closures on. I know this looks a bit, oh, I've just, pressed it, I'm going to squidge it, but you need to get all this out the way. So I'm going to bring in my outer piece. So the end where the handles are very close to the top, or the edge of the fabric is the top, and that's where you put it. So that's your top of your base, and that's where you put it right sides together. So I'll flip that over, and if anything, you're going to pin particular pieces, or I'm going to use my quilting clips actually, so I'm going to make sure that I clip those together. And you've got this big lump to get around, but you can stitch around that. Now with the slider part, I would just tuck that out of the way, because you're just going to stitch right past it. Again, just make sure it's all meeting beautifully. Now to turn this through, I suggest you leave the whole bottom edge open, because there's a lot of bulk in this bag. And like I say, just make sure all of your box part is tucked out of the way. Put a clip or a pin there just to hold it, keeps it out of your way. And the straps as well. And then just make sure that those corners meet up. So there we are. So we're now right sides together. There's the front, if you like, and there's the back. There was the base. We'll just pop these bits out of the way. So literally we're going to go all the way around, and I'm going to start at this seam here and just go all the way around and finish up the top there. And then I'll be ready for turning through. Now you could top stitch this whole thing. Now this is where you're going to go back to your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you followed all the way through, you've used a lot of 1/2 inch seam allowances, which I very rarely do, but you needed that really lovely fold on the seams to be able to, for it to lay nicely when you've ironed open the seams flat. Just make sure we've got our box parts tucked in or tucked out of the way. Just take your time as you go past these pieces. You don't want to unpick it. You don't want to turn it through and then realise you've caught something. That would be such a shame. Make sure your edges are meeting up. You could reduce your stitch length, because I've still got it on 3 from when I've been top stitching. Ideally, you're going to bring your stitch length down to 2.5, something like that. So up to the top, put your needle down and pivot. I do a little back stitch there as well, just to make sure that it's nice and strong. So needle down and pivot. So where my clips are, I know that's a little part of the bag that I just want to make sure everything is tucked inside. So I'm keeping my eye on all of that, making sure all the seams meet. Just carefully go past all that bulk. It's not difficult, it's just you've got to be aware that it's there. I'm using a regular size needle and it's a 12. You could, if your fabric is thicker, use a 14. If you're using faux leather, you don't need to change your needle at all, just use your regular needle. It would look rather lovely in a black faux leather. And of course then you can send your other half maybe to get the tea or the coffee. Back stitch just at the end there to secure. And let's just get all these bits out of the way. So there we are, practically done. Then I'll show you how to make the slider, which is so easy. And we've used an iron-on vinyl actually for making the slider waterproof. So just get your hand in there, right inside, and get your corners. You need something to grab hold of. It's a long tube with a lot going on. So just pull with one hand and push it through with the other. So you've got that box to contend with and the straps as well. So just ease it through. It will happen. There's no rush. You don't want to hear any stitches snap. They'll get to a certain part where it's coming through now. And you can see now why I leave the whole of that bottom edge open for turning, because there's such a lot of bulk here. So there we go. Just get my fingers in there just to push those corners out. I'm loving the blue fabric. It's like a Japanese fabric, so it's got a little bit of a sparkle to it. Maybe I'm gonna go and have to get the coffees now. Should have made a black one. Push those corners out. Now you could, if you wanted to, top stitch all the way around. It's not necessary, it doesn't really need it once it's had a good press. So if we open that up, get the strap the right way. That's it, it's looking a little bit better now. Let's untwist that strap, there we go. So all we need to do now is give it a really good press, and I'm just going to fold these ends over a 1/4 inch or so and top stitch, and then I'm going to show you how to make the slider part that goes in just here. Right, I've given it a really good press, so it's now ready for me to complete it by making the slider, and also I'm going to pop the poppers on as well so you can see how I've placed those. So we can get this out of the way for the time being. So the slider pieces, it actually tells you in the pattern again what sizes you need to cut, and I've done it with the same side fabric. I've also got a piece of mount board here to make it really stiff, so the bottom really sits nicely on your counter or in your car, wherever you're going to have it. So you're going to stitch around 3 sides, so you're going to leave one short edge open to put the mount board in, so it's a real stiff card. If you don't have any mount board, then several layers of just your regular card is fine, just sort of glue those together. So 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now if you wanted to, you know, we've made that little part so we can slide that in and out, and we're going to put a ribbon in there. You could leave that part out and stitch the edges into the side seams like I did with that 3rd edge along the side, and then you can actually make this to put inside, so you can take it in and out sort of manually instead of sliding. But I quite like the slider effect, so it's entirely up to you. So it just then becomes like a base bottom really, doesn't it? So a nice back stitch at the end there. I don't top stitch this, but I do top stitch the end, and I've got a little piece of ribbon that we can pop in to make the loop. So just trim away the corners, just be careful of your stitches. And actual fact, I just trim always a little bit more, just to take some of that bulk away. So it looks like that, just sort of trimmed away. And then you're just going to turn it through. Now if you've back stitched when you started stitching, then none of these seams will come undone when you're turning through and putting pressure on it. So let's get the pokey tool in. It's really good to get something like this where it's safe. I mean, sometimes I use the rounded edges of my scissors, but have a look around. Go onto the usual shopping online shops and see what you can find. So it's a sort of a turning tool, that's what it's called. So there's our little pocket to go inside. I'll just give that a quick press. Right, so we can see if our mount board fits inside. If it doesn't, we can always trim it down. So I've got a black and a white, it doesn't matter what colours you get. And like I say, all the sizes of all the pattern pieces you need are on the pattern, so you don't need to worry. So I could probably do with trimming that down a little bit. We caught on the wadding. Let's just trim it down. Let's use my paper scissors. So you could use a rotary cutter on this if you've got a rotary cutter that's seen better days or the blade has, then you can use it for this. So let's just slide that in again. That's it, that's better now. I think it's catching on the wadding somewhere. There we go. It's gone all the way in. There we go. We also want to make sure that it goes right in, so you've got a bit of a seam allowance there. So there's that, you can see the black, but you can see that when we tuck that in, we can stitch that. As long as you're careful, you don't want to stitch on that mount board. And I could cut that back just a wee bit more, which I think I will. It's better to cut a little bit away at a time, because it all depends on your seam allowances when you stitch. There we go. So that's ready now just to top stitch in place, which I'll do now. And then we can pop the vinyl on there as well, just to give it that lovely waterproof. You could just wipe it over with a damp cloth. So just a little piece, about 3 inches. We're going to pop it inside. Let's get the iron and the magic mat out of the way. So like I say, just be careful where you're stitching. Try and get as close to that edge as you can. You might want to glue this. Now I start a little bit away from the edge, because sometimes it'll catch in your machine. So just keep that card out of the way. There we go. Needle down if you can, because that holds everything together. So I'm just making sure that my seam allowances are the same all the way along. There we are, that's better. So when we get to the ribbon, you could perhaps give a double stitch there just to hold that in place. It's nice and strong, because you're going to be pulling on that. A little back stitch just to finish there, that's fine. So just trim your threads. So I've got the wadding side up, and I've got the mount board at the back. So caught some of my thread there. A bit of a bird's nest going on. There we go. So now all you need to do is cut a piece of vinyl, and it's an iron-on vinyl, especially for these sorts of projects. So I'm just going to roughly cut a piece. I'm just going to draw around it and then cut it. And you can use the waist of your... Probably even better to do this on the paper side. I can just about see it. So use the waste from your vinyl to actually iron it down with. Now you can do this before you stitch the whole thing together. So you're thinking, why have you done it when you've finished it almost? Well, the thing is, when you turn it through, when you've stitched it together and you've used the vinyl, you turn it through, the vinyl crinkles a little bit, and it doesn't iron out very well. So all I'm going to do is pop that down onto my base, just pop it straight over the top. That fits absolutely perfectly. And then I'm just going to use my paper that I've just cut my vinyl from, just to seal that. Now if you want, you could use baking paper, that sort of thing. And if your paper, because this paper is absolutely the same size as the vinyl, and if you haven't put it on quite straight enough, you might find that the edges sort of crinkle of the vinyl. Please don't worry about that. The main thing is you're going to have a wipeable surface. And then you can just peel that away. I haven't quite caught that bit, that's fine. There we go. So now you can just peel that away. There we go. And you've got a piece of fabric that's now covered in vinyl, so it's wipeable, and that just slots in to your carrier. So poppers, I've got all my tools here to do the poppers with. So you need a hole punch. Now we've talked about these before. It's an automatic hole punch that you need to search for when you're looking for it. So I'm just going to bring up the side of my bag here and make sure that it's in the center. So look, see where your seams are of your base, and it stands proud of about 1/4 inch or so. So I'm going to make a hole all the way through those layers. I'm going to hold everything together, bring my rubber mat in so I don't make a hole in my table, although this would be quite a feat to go all the way through. I doubt whether I'm going to do it in one hit, but we'll give it a go. Ideally you're going to measure this. I'm doing it by eye, and make your hole. Hopefully that's gone all the way through. Yes, not bad. There we go. That's gone through now. So you're going to put the button, the shiny little button, on the front of your project. Let's have a look. Still hasn't gone through. There we go. It's gone through now. You're going to put the button on the back. So if I turn that around, you'll see there's the button on the back. I'm going to put either the stud or the socket on top of that. Let's put the socket, as long as you put the opposite on the other side, and then bring my tool in. Make sure the button goes into the silver dish and give it a squidge. And you just want to make sure that the center part of that popper is now flattened inside. And then we're just going to do the other side. So the button goes on the inside of your box. And because we've used the socket here, we want a stud. So the stud goes on there. And if you do push them together, if you do push them together now, they will stay together quite well. You just want to turn that so it's good for me. Bring my tool in, make sure that the button goes in the silver dish again, and just give it a squidge. I always use two hands. You don't need that extra strength. If you feel that you haven't squidged it enough, then go and squidge it again, and that then can just pop together. There we go, that's it. So all I do then is the other side. Now when I looked at this before, I thought maybe, oops, here's my pokey tool, maybe you could put another popper here as well. I wouldn't use Velcro or hook and loop, because you've got to consider that you've got 2 cups of coffee in here. So let's bring the cups in. And what we don't want to do is to cause any sort of movement. So if you had Velcro going all the way along, which is a good idea, as you unpeel that, you'd have to hold the coffee to make sure it doesn't spill. So I found 1 to be perfectly fine, but you might want to put 2 in, and then you can put another one in the other side. So what happens now is this gets folded over, and the handles then actually hold the whole thing in place. And there you have a lovely blue moor. So don't forget to download the pattern, and you can make a few of these.